I love Advent. I love Advent. The modern mystic Rumi, he once wrote these words. He said, "Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas and language, even the phrase, each other, doesn't make any sense." Even the phrase, each other, doesn't make any sense. Richard Rohr, when he reflected on that passage from Rumi, said this. He said, "A unitive, non-dualistic consciousness opens our hearts and our minds and our bodies to actually experience the God in the now." Let me ask you a question. Jim, you can't answer. I need a show of hands. How many of you thought I forgot to light the or the Advent candle? Oh gosh, only one? I thought everybody would do this. I did it on purpose. There was a dramatic effect. It was supposed to be. I purposely did that because every time we start the season of Advent, what do we do at the very first liturgy? We start with the blessing of the Advent wreath, and then we light the first candle, and we sing the most god-awful repeated song of the history, O come, Emmanuel. And we hear it for the next 4 weeks, and we don't like that song anymore for the rest of our lives, and we keep doing that every year, right? So I did this to show us we need to sometimes put ourselves and our ritual on its ears once in a while to say, whoa, something's different. That's what this season is about. So thanks for pointing it out. It's cool, it was cool. You see, my friends, we often put our minds, or at least put in our minds, exactly how God is supposed to be, or how we're supposed to celebrate God, or even how we're supposed to do prayer together in our minds, and we say that's how it has to happen, right? We have to walk in, we have to be silent before. That's why it was like everybody went silent. We all do these kind of rituals with one another. It's like, okay, we got to put ourselves in the presence of God. What if God is noisy? I don't know, but maybe. If we asked anyone what this season of Advent is about, I bet you almost unanimously we would hear something about, it's a season of waiting, or it's a season of, anticipation of the birth of the Christ child, or some iteration thereof. Because we have in our minds programmed to think that spirituality is kind of a either or and not a both and. We think, in Richard Rohr's terms, in a binary, right? We think either black or white, male or female, dark or light, all those binaries that we have in our lives. That's how we think often of our spiritual journey. And what Richard Rohr is trying to point out, and what Rumi is trying to point out, and what I believe the gospel is trying to point out is, whoa, people, it's not that binary at all. It's much bigger. It's much bigger. And the challenge of this Advent season is to open our hearts to let it be that big. I'm going to step out on a limb tonight and invite you to consider the fact that there are numerous times, I firmly believe, if we allow ourselves to perceive reality in a different rather than dualistic binary, there are numerous times in which you and I have encountered God in our lives. Yay? I'm not going to cut the branch off, but I think that's probably a pretty safe saying. We have encountered God numerous times in our lives. I have heard it in the experiences of death, or the dying of a loved one, or in the birth of a child, or in the call that informed us that we got the job that we've been dreaming about our whole lives when we're 23, or the call that informed us that our jobs have been eliminated, right? That's when we know, even if it's in hindsight, that we have experienced God. And usually it's in hindsight, right? Usually it's much after the pain of the experience or the joy of the experience that you say, wow, that was phenomenal, right? Not what I expected, but that was phenomenal. We have experienced God in the grief of loss and the ecstasy of joy. And I believe, my friends, we also have experienced God in a million times between what that is and that is. And yet we have rarely recognized the God who's present right there all the time. In other words, my friends, I believe that the world is filled with sacramental moments. In fact, in the early church, there was an argument that there were truly 8 sacraments, not the one we refer to as eating, but 8 sacraments in the early church. And that 8th sacrament was the sacrament of the present moment. The sacrament of the present moment. Not simply the 7 that you and I and the church agree to. Those are simply 7 collectively agreed upon moments in which we as a body say, yep, we have most likely experienced God. But that sacrament of the present moment is the sacrament that never stops, that never quits being celebrated if only we allow ourselves to experience it. If you have ever encountered God with unmistakable clarity, and I know some of you have, you know exactly what I mean. And if you have not, I can tell you this, by living the command of this gospel today, I can assure you, because God is most fully experienced in the present moment, it will happen for you. You will meet God if you allow yourself to be present in this moment. You see, my friends, I think Jesus got it. I think he got it. I think the disciples were kind of like, duh. But I think Jesus got it, and I believe that's why he shared this story. This story happens immediately before he begins his passion in Mark's gospel. This is the last chapter, and then the passion begins. It was as if Jesus was saying, listen, God's going to show up at a time and in a way you don't expect. And it's going to be really hellish, right? It's really going to suck. But that's where God's going to show up. So hang on. Hang on. So, hold on. Tonight, I don't know if I can make it through this, so I'm going to get this ready. I have to say this with absolute truthfulness. I had an experience yesterday, and I got to meet God face to face. Never thought that would ever happen, but I got to see God face to face. So let me set the stage for you and invite you into that experience a bit. This past week, I received a phone call that said, "Hey, Marty, you want to be the support person for one of the incarcerated persons who's going to be experiencing a VOD." I know you don't know what that is. A VOD is a victim offender dialogue. So victim offender dialogues happen extremely rarely in the DOC. It's actually an opportunity for the person who has been harmed and the one who did the harm to actually come face to face with one another and sit across the table from each other and share the hurt, the pain, the joy, all of that, right? This process takes a year for both the victim and a year for the offender, as we call them, to take place. So there's 2 years of preparation on it, and then these two meet. And it's an experience of mutuality, right? Nobody's walking into this looking for a fight. Nobody's walking into this trying to find blame. Mostly, it's people who are seeking understanding, usually understanding that they couldn't gain in the trial process or the pre-trial process or the conviction process. All of that happens in a VOD. They are so rare that they happen about one time a year. We have 10,000 people incarcerated in the state of Minnesota. They happen about one time a year. So, pretty impactful, right? And as human beings, we never know exactly how that experience is going to work out. You know, you bring the victim and an offender face to face, and you literally set them across the table from each other. I'm never quite sure what's going to happen. I had this experience from my time as a chaplain. I thought I understood the depth of their experience. I'd never sat in that chair. I'd never been a part of that because that's not allowed. It's just the person, the offender, the offended, their two support people, and two mediators, and that's all that's ever allowed in that context. But I've processed through some of that over those 12 years with a number of people who had been through that, and I thought I had a grasp of what this was going into it. So I thought I knew what this sacred experience was going to be. I have to say, little did I know that God was going to show up in a room right in front of me. So the incarcerated person that I accompanied previously was one of my clerks, right? Worked for me at Stillwater. He worked for me for 7 years there. He, at 19 years old, murdered a 23-year-old acquaintance of his. And that 23-year-old acquaintance had a 3-year-old son. The victim, survivor who requested that VOD, is that child who's now 24. So 21 years ago, this took place. I'll get it together, hang on. So it's the first time in 21 years that I'm just going to call them A and B. So A is the victim and B is the offender. Okay, we're just going to keep it simple. This is the first time in 21 years that A got to meet B. First time ever they ever got to meet. The only thing that B or A had was that they had a mugshot of B, and if you know anything about mugshots, they're the furthest cry from a glamour shot that you could ever come up with, right? So it's pretty bad. That makes you look even, I don't care how bad you are, it makes you even look worse. So we knew that A had seen a picture of B. When B and I and the facilitator stepped into the room with the victim and his support person and the other facilitator, B immediately knew who it was and reached across the table and shook hands. And while I can't share the details of the next 3.5 hours, I can ask you this. How many times in our gospel tonight did Jesus say, stay awake? Just take a guess. What the hell? Huh? 3. It's okay. Overachiever. 3 times. 3 times Jesus said in the gospel tonight, stay awake. Watch, be on guard, stay awake. 3 times in 3.5 hours, this 24-year-old man said to be these exact words. You no longer need to carry any guilt or shame about what happened. You are free. You are forgiven. And you are redeemed. 3 times. 3 times. You are free, you are forgiven, and you are redeemed. And A went on to say to B, in the midst of that conversation, he said, I'm a sinner just like you. And he said, the only difference between me and you is that society has deemed that your sin is greater than the sin of mine that society knows. And for that, you have spent 21 years of your life in this institution. and I'm sorry. The child said, I'm sorry. Wow. God showed up. He continued, he said, I'm no better than you, and I'm no different. I pray for you daily, and I only wish you the very best. And I'm sorry that you've had to live this life for the last 21 years. And I'm here to tell you to your face, you are loved, and you are forgiven, and you are free. In those 3.5 hours, over and over and over again, I met God, literally, manifested in both A and in B, both of them. It was as if God was standing right there in front of me. They radiated and lived what Rumi said and what the gospel encourages you and I to do and to be. I mean, can you imagine with me for just a moment, just imagine sitting in a room across the table from God and having God look at you right in the eye and simply say to you and to me, you no longer need to carry any guilt or shame. You are free, you are forgiven, and you are loved and redeemed. Can you imagine? So what did I learn from that meeting and that experience? And reflecting on this gospel, because I thought, oh God, this fits. This is one of the many lessons that I learned from meeting God yesterday. Don't wait. Don't wait. If there's something that needs to be said, some hurt that needs to be healed, some joy that needs to be expressed, or some resentment that needs to be released, start working on it now. God is here in this present moment, in this space, right here, right now. Here's our opportunity to change the world, to show the face of our God to others, and to begin to heal. It's most likely going to take some time, and that's okay. But as the gospel reminds us, just don't stop. Stay awake. Stay alert. For we never know when God's going to show up or even how God's going to show up. Because I can tell you, I certainly didn't expect God to show up inside a securely locked, razor wire covered conference room yesterday. But God knocked on the door, and both A and B ran over and opened it. And I'm utterly convinced we can too. We are free, we are forgiven, and we are redeemed.